Hemlines may rise and fall, but clothes prices seem to travel in just one direction. And that's especially true this year. Richard Roth has more in this Dollars and Cents report.
Attention clothes shoppers, do not delay inside the dressing room.
Prices are going in the clothing industry up.
Women's apparel has already seen the biggest increase, more than 3 times that of menswear.
Outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. They've escalated so much that I buy all used clothing, I buy all antique clothing, I go to thrift shops.
Prices have gone up on average 15 to 20% in the last year. Clothiers are preparing for a possible backlash.
It appears that we have a softening economy, a softening in potential demand, and rising prices, which is the most frightening area to be in terms of running a business based on natural commodities.
New buyers of fiber and yarn on the world market, such as the Soviet Union and China, mean higher prices domestically.
This is a cashmere coat for this fall, which will retail for approximately $600. For fall of 1989, that coat will be at least $700 to $750.
A lot of consumers, a lot of shoppers will be buying less but better and more lastingly fashionable clothes.
Some stores are expected to do away with lower-priced items as they try to attract the increasing pool of women in the workforce who are buying suits. Clothes buyer John O'Neill says despite the high prices, the time to buy is now.
If a man is smart, he'll go out and buy his wardrobe for next year now.
Even if the dollar reversed course and other global pressures eased, industry figures say don't expect prices to head back to their old levels. Richard Roth, CNN, New York.
Skiing used to be just a winter sport until now. Suzanne Saunders reports on a California man who's built an all-weather slope right in his backyard.
I'd like to step into my hidden hideaway of Nordic snow.
Enter the world of Erling Østrad-Vik, creator of what he calls Nordic snow, the snow for all seasons. He's turned part of his warm backyard in Walnut Creek into a test ramp for his invention, with skiers of varied skills showing how well his artificial snow skis. Erling has carpeted much of his backyard in the years of testing his invention, but his preferred undersurface is a special plastic mat over which he pours his snow. Most artificial snow is just the plastic, brittle and dangerous.
Nordic snow is actually rock salt. It's covered with Erling's special silicone formula so it doesn't melt in the sun, and it didn't dissolve in the rain we had this week.
Erling, if you haven't guessed already, is a man of dreams. He's made a model of what he'd like to see, an all-season Nordic center for those without the time, money, or ability to reach a ski resort. He'd supply the snow, the nylon-bottom skis. All he needs are investors.
I like also to make it available to the younger people who cannot afford, the less privileged children who may never get to see snow in the mountains. They should be able to ski under ideal conditions close to home and at a bargain price.
And cross-country skiing is a great exercise for seniors, says Erling, like himself, 77, suffering from cancer, yet full of life. Erling's search for the best artificial snow began after the 1932 Olympics. In 1950, he made a film, Barnyard Skiing. When he says he's tried everything else, you believe him, including the chicken feathers.
But the sneezing that can result was an obvious drawback.
38 years later, Erling Østrad-Vik has found his perfect surface. His dream is to share it.
That's our report this half hour. Thanks for joining us. I'm Micah Johnson. Around the world in 30 minutes, this is Headline News. Headline News. I'm Micah Johnson, sitting in for Lynn Vaughn. The superpowers are accentuating the positive in the final days before the 4th Reagan-Gorbachev summit. Secretary of State George Shultz yesterday praised the Soviet leader for working to improve the climate of U.S.-Soviet relations. Schultz's comments came on the heels of a wide-ranging interview Mr. Gorbachev gave to the Washington Post. In it, he pledged to work beyond next week's summit to sign a comprehensive arms reduction agreement before President Reagan leaves office. The U.S. Senate today resumes debate on the INF treaty. On the agenda are several amendments intended to prevent the agreement's ratification before the summit begins. A Soviet spokesman says that prospect, although disappointing, would not be the end of the world.
When we were in Washington in December, people told us that don't worry, there will be the majority in the Senate and it will be, the treaty will be ratified by April. Now we have May already. It's not a big tragedy, but simply, well, we expect that if you promise, then you must deliver. But we also understand your political system. So it's not a big tragedy, but of course it's a good sign of your willingness to improve relations between our countries if you ratify a treaty by the time of the Moscow summit.
American culture has made several inroads into the Soviet Union in recent years. Gerlin Jans reports the USSR is looking more and more Western every day.
From fast foods like genuine New Jersey pizza, where the waiting lines are long and the appetite's apparently insatiable, to American pop culture, where visiting stars play to packed houses, it seems that the Americanization of Moscow has begun. For years, American culture had been officially scorned under a political system that claims the communist way of life is superior to the decadent consumer-oriented West. But there's always been an underground appetite for things American, such as jeans, T-shirts, pop music, and video cassettes. With Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev's initiatives to the West, official approval has now been bestowed on American culture. Pepsi Cola broke the Cold War icicles a decade ago in Moscow. And where Pepsi is, Coke is not far behind. McDonald's Golden Arches will soon join New Jersey Pizza to add variety to a normally bland Soviet diet.
Well, I'd like to see more things in Moscow, such as hamburgers, pizzas, and hot dogs, and other things.
The joint business venture seems the path towards increased Americanization of the Soviet Union. Moscow's House of Fashion has joined with a U.S. firm to make Soviet-American sportswear. While industrialist Arm & Hammer is signing multi-billion-dollar deals to exploit Siberia's vast natural resources, scores of other American businessmen are being courted by Soviet leader Gorbachev to invest in a wide variety of projects. While Soviet openness does have its limits, American celebrities like Robert Redford, who showed several of his films, and Robert De Niro, who judged at a movie festival, say that they want to encourage the positive changes in the Kremlin's attitude to the once forbidden West. Moscow is still far from being a westernized city, but the increasing acceptance of American culture will probably bring irreversible change to this one-time showplace of rigid communism. Gerlin Jans, CNN, Moscow.
Glasnost has apparently come to Hungary. Karolaj Groch was chosen last night to replace János Kadar as head of the Communist Party there. It was the first time in 32 years Hungary has had such a power change. The move was bolstered by Mikhail Gorbachev's reformist policies. Groch is considered to be a leader in Gorbachev's pragmatist tradition. President Reagan remains undecided on whether to approve a deal that's now on the table to force Panamanian ruler Manuel Noriega out of office. Kenny Crowley reports from Washington.
The newly revealed basics are this. The U.S. drops drug charges against Noriega. He leaves Panama for what's described as a period of time.
Both sides are examining it very closely. There are a few outstanding elements, and the best way to characterize it at the moment is it is on hold.
Facing criticism at home, top Reagan officials admit they'd rather extradite and try Noriega, but concede they can't force him into it.
Which situation are we better off in? To have Noriega more or less in charge in Panama, and us with an indictment that we can't do much about, but nevertheless holding on to it.
Or drop the charges and Noriega leaves Panama. But he would leave behind his hand-picked military advisors and Manuel Solas Palma, the man Noriega chose to replace President Del Valle when Del Valle tried to fire Noriega. The proposed deal would keep Noriega out of Panama beyond the country's 1989 elections, but that doesn't mean he couldn't influence affairs from afar.
It's not clear that we can remove him from actions behind the scenes, but the important thing is he loses the levers of power that he currently has a complete hand on.
Leading senators worry that the bottom line leaves Noriega in the catbird seat.
The administration has painted itself in a corner. It appears that we're about to hand Noriega the paintbrush, and I don't know how we get out of the corner.
Indeed, more than one person has suggested that Noriega is simply yanking the U.S. chain to make the colossus from the north look silly. Yet Reagan officials say they believe Noriega is negotiating seriously. And what if things should fall apart? We've ruled out nothing, said one official, but we're trying to settle things peacefully. Candy Crowley for CNN, Washington.
Supporters of Attorney General Edwin Meese say there's nothing to a published report that says Justice Department officials believe he's involved in influence peddling. The New York Daily News reported yesterday that Meese possibly accepted illegal gratuities from a longtime lawyer friend. Meese's lawyer says no one who has seen the evidence could say those things. Jesse Jackson's campaign continues, even though the race for the Democratic presidential campaign is effectively over. Yesterday in California, Jackson used the platform to drive home his ideas on the Middle East. Mark Leff has more.
Jesse Jackson combined his callings while campaigning in California Sunday, pausing before a rally to perform a marriage. Becky Steen asked him to marry her to James Monday. The father of the bride was not there to give her away. Alan Steen is a teacher at Beirut University who's been held captive in Lebanon since January 1987 and who's been reported in poor health.
We will not rest until all the hostages are set free. We'll not rest until the Middle East itself is set free, because right now the whole region is in captivity.
Jackson's been stumping the state for days, trying to boost his eventual vote count in the June 7th primary that'll elect 314 convention delegates, and promising striking cannery workers in Central California that he'll push for his workplace democracy plan when the party meets to define its goals in July.
That basic economic Bill of Rights must be a part of a platform in Atlanta, Georgia.
A very tall Georgian named Dominique Wilkins gave the Democrats a better shot at having a physical platform by convention time, as well as boosting morale in Michael Dukakis' hometown. The Atlanta Hawks playoff loss to Boston Sunday means the Hawks' home court in Atlanta, which is also the convention site, is now available for workers to begin building the new floor the Democratic delegates will be sitting on in just 8 weeks. Dukakis, who was home in Massachusetts on Sunday, is drawing ever closer to the Democratic nomination. And Georgia's Democratic governor, Joe Frank Harris, a Gore backer, says Dukakis has a fair chance of defeating George Bush in the fall. New York's Democratic governor, Mario Cuomo, went beyond that Sunday, saying Dukakis will beat Bush by a landslide. Mark Leff, CNN, reporting.
Coming up on Headline News, independent movie producers have found a showcase for their work at the Cannes Film Festival. TV evangelist Jimmy Swaggart is back in the pulpit. The defrocked minister preached before about 5,000 worshipers at his Louisiana Family Worship Center yesterday. Swaggart preached without his credentials as an Assemblies of God minister. The denomination banned him after he refused to accept their punishment for his alleged encounter with a prostitute. 3 months ago, Swaggart confessed to unspecified sins. But yesterday, he was looking ahead, saying the Holy Spirit told him to forget the past. His sermon was Christian basics.
Well, hallelujah! Hallelujah! At the midnight cry when Jesus comes again. He's coming, he's coming, he's coming.
Swaggart says his donations to his multi-million-dollar ministry are at an all-time low. Nevertheless, he says his support will return, and ministry faithful seem to agree.
What do you think about Jimmy Swaggart returning to the pulpit?
Well, I'm very pleased about it. I'm very pleased. I know his situation right now, but I'm glad that he's recovering, and I support him fully.
Jimmy Swaggart should return to the pulpit. He has to ask for forgiveness, and he has repented, and the Lord loves him, and he has forgiven him, and we have all forgiven him.
He's the greatest, and he's going to be more popular than ever. I think he's going to make it. God's going to forgive him. The people's going to forgive him.
Revenge was the apparent motive behind the shooting death of a federal judge in New York State. Investigators say the judge had just ruled against the suspected gunman's daughter. More from Jeff Weiser.
There are not many violent crimes that take place in the Westchester County village of Pelham, an affluent community just north of New York City. But on Saturday, a pleasant springtime afternoon was interrupted with gunshots. Shots allegedly fired by a middle-aged white male at 56-year-old federal judge Richard Duranko.
Duranko was the victim of a homicide, and the killer, after taking the judge's life, took his own life with a shot to the head, right in the judge's home.
Police say the assailant first shot Duranko with a handgun in the yard of his well-kept home as he did gardening, then chased him into the house, firing more shots, which killed the judge. Neighbors say Duranko's wife and one of his 5 children screamed for help during the attack. It was only last year that President Reagan appointed the judge to serve in the federal court's Southern District of New York. Before that, Duranko, the son of Italian immigrants, had a long and well-respected judicial career as a state Supreme Court justice.
All of us in the United States Attorney's Office are very deeply hurt by all of this, and feel very bad for the judge's family and for all of his friends and associates. He was a fine man. He was not only a very good judge, but he was a very decent human being.
Late Sunday, the FBI identified a former New York City police officer as the killer. 67-year-old Charles Coster of Bath, Pennsylvania, whose daughter had lost a lawsuit before the judge.
Lawsuit which involved charges of sexual harassment and salary discrimination finally went to trial. On May 19, 1988, Judge Duranko issued a decision against Carol Lee Coster in this matter. A suicide note was located, the context of which indicates displeasure with the judge's decision.
Friends and colleagues say they'll remember Judge Duranko as a great man who was well-liked, and the judge's family issued a statement expressing their deep shock, saying this has devastated his family and the entire community. Jeff Weiser, CNN, Pelham, New York.
Talks resumed today to end a strike by TV and film writers. Guild members walked off the job 11 weeks ago over issues of creative control, residual payments, and foreign distribution. Screenwriters vote Thursday on proposed contracts with independent producers. Approval would allow some writers to resume work. Leaders of the 9,000-member Writers Guild of America recommend ratification. The Cannes Film Festival is more than a place to showcase the latest blockbusters. As Jonathan Mann reports, it's also a place for small independent producers from all over the globe to make a splash.
There are a lot of films at Cannes that will do well wherever they play, with stars you know at a glance. But King of Children isn't one of them. Its actors are youngsters in China. Neither is Salam Bombay, or Onimura from Japan, or Mapansula from South Africa. No stars in this one, no big studio behind it. Just a small group of black and white South Africans hoping Cannes will be their film's big break. Actor Thomas Mokgatlane had never been out of South Africa before he came to Cannes with director Oliver Schmitz.
He's the center actually of filmmaking and work and everything.
Mapansula is a small-time hood, Soweto, a gangster who finds he can no longer ignore the politics of apartheid.
He's the first major feature to come out of South Africa, made with the involvement of black people.
Cannes is giving that film and others a chance to be seen.
The variety is really tremendous. That is a strong point.
Director Peter Wang is an independent filmmaker whose movies have enjoyed great critical acclaim in the United States. He's come to Cannes from San Francisco to introduce them to Europeans.
I would like to see their reaction, how these things functioning, how you sell a film here. Those things are the main reason for me to come here.
Cannes may be best known for its big film stars and topless starlets, all-night parties and excess. But among small filmmakers, it has another reputation as a place where a little guy can come hoping for a big break. Jonathan Mann, CNN, at the Cannes Film Festival.
Headline Sports is next. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Time for Headline Sports.
I'm Steve Getty, Headline Sports. It was what one might expect from a seventh game, near perfection. At the Boston Garden, the Celtics and Hawks went all out for the right to play Detroit in the Eastern Conference Finals. Dominique Wilkins scored a game-high 47 points as the Hawks shot 57% from the floor. But Larry Bird, who was 9 of 10 from the field in the fourth quarter, spurred Boston to victory. All Bird did was score 20 of his 34 points in the final period as the Celtics were 118-116 winners. Also at the Boston Garden, Edmonton moved within one win of repeating its Stanley Cup title. Asa Tiikkanen's hat trick helped the Oilers to a 6-3 triumph over the Bruins and a 3-0 lead in the best-of-7 series. In baseball, the Atlanta Braves ended a 3-game losing streak by beating the Pirates 6-4. Bruce Benedict's 2-run double highlighted a 5-run fifth. Sunday night, Braves general manager Bobby Cox said it was time for a change, dismissing manager Chuck Tanner and 4 of his coaches. Russ Nixon, one-time Cincy skipper, who's been managing in the Braves farm system, takes over. The Astros now lead the slumping Dodgers by a game and a half in the West. Chuck Jackson's double scored Alex Trevino with the tie-breaking run in the top of the ninth, and Houston nipped St. Louis 2-1. L.A. lost to the Mets and David Cone 5-2. Darryl Strawberry belted his league-leading 11th home run as the Mets swept the 3-game set from the Dodgers. Rookie Mark Grace drove in 4 runs with a double and homer as the Cubs belted Cincinnati 5-1. Since being promoted, Grace has hit in 10 of 11 games. San Diego dumped Philadelphia while Montreal lost to the Giants. In the American, Jack Clark's 2-run homer was all John Candelaria needed for a 2-0 2-hit shutout of Oakland as the Yankees took the rubber game of the 3-game weekend set between the division leaders. Cleveland is still a half game back of the Yankees in the East after rallying to down Kansas City 8-7. Julio Franco's 2-out 3-run homer in the 9th tied it. Then with 2 outs in the 10th, Ron Washington singled home Mel Hall with the game winner. Boston bombed California. The Orioles won their 2nd in a row. Detroit down Chicago. Milwaukee topped Toronto. The Twins clubbed Texas. And in the nightcap, they did it to them with a grand slam, 2 outs in the 9th by Gary Gaetti. In golf, Lanny Wadkins won the Colonial by 1 stroke over a trio of competitors. And Sherry Turner won her first event in 5 years on the tour by capturing the LPGA Championship. Steve Getty, Headline Sports.
In the headlines, the Senate resumes debate today on the INF Missile Treaty. President Reagan hopes to have the agreement approved before heading to Moscow for this week's Superpower Summit. White House officials say the president hasn't made up his mind about a plan to remove Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega, but a deal is on the table. And funeral services will be held today for the lone student killed during Friday's school shooting near Chicago. Those are the hour's top stories. I'm Wally Kaiser.
Checking today's weather, the entire eastern half of the nation will be under cloudy skies. The heaviest rain will fall in the Ohio Valley from Ohio to Illinois. Look for scattered showers over the Mississippi Valley and the mid-Atlantic states. More news after this. It's said that golfers drive for show and putt for dough. But in Japan, the real dollars and cents is being made off the putting greens. Brian Jenkins explains.
For Japanese businessmen, golf is more than a sport. It's a professional obligation, and any executive here worth his 9-iron is obliged to belong to at least one golf club. About 20 years ago, demand started soaring past supply, making memberships valuable commodities, even accepted by many loan companies as collateral.
Golf membership in Japan is a kind of a negotiable instrument.
Hiroshi Kato runs one of the estimated 400 brokerage firms in Tokyo that trade golf club memberships. To belong to the city's top country club, where the roster includes past and present prime ministers, an applicant must now put up some $2.5 million. The average fee at the 700 or so golf courses around Tokyo runs about $120,000. That does not include a registration fee of about $8,000, annual dues averaging about $200, and green fees of up to $50 a round. Kato tells of British businessmen who wired their company in London for permission to buy a few memberships.
What head office answered to them, we are not talking about buying the whole golf course.
It's been the rapidly rising value of land here that's helped drive up the cost of golf course memberships. Prices fluctuate from week to week, often rising when the stock market performs poorly. But while memberships may be solid investments, they don't always provide convenience. Some courses require reservations up to half a year ahead. To avoid the crowds, many golfers here travel 2 hours outside Tokyo, but memberships at those clubs can still cost about $2,500. That's why so many Japanese golfers find it cheaper and only slightly less convenient to fly to California, Hawaii, or somewhere else in Asia to get their fill of chasing little white balls. Brian Jenkins, CNN, Tokyo.
An English couple has invested nearly 3 decades of hard work renovating a rundown country manor. Now their labor is paying off to the tune of $1 million. Richard Blystone has more.
When the Corbetts came to roost at Tut Hill Manor, they knew part of what they were getting into. A couple of feet of chicken manure.
When we came, we opened the windows such as they were, or if there weren't any windows because the vandals had been in, we just shoveled it all out.
Nowadays, the livestock are a quieter sort, and a house straight out of a picture postcard has taken the place of the tumble-down home for chickens, turkeys, and horses that was just about to be torn down when the Corbetts found it back in 1961.
We pulled 2 weatherboards off and we discovered this medieval window. And that set us alight. That set the whole project going. I said to my wife, shall we have a go? And she said, why not?
Somewhere in there were the remains of a 15th century manor house. But to a housewife and a school teacher, it was like setting out with a penknife to build the pyramids.
All the experts said nothing could be done with it. They thought we're absolutely mad. And an article was written in Hertfordshire Countryside headed The Madman of Tut Hill Manor.
It was an obsession. The Corbetts learned carpentry and bricklaying and worked every spare minute, turning up in the process a small museum of artifacts left behind by 400 years of inhabitants. Finally, last December, after 27 years of work, the last nail was pounded and the Corbetts found out their chicken shack is now worth nearly $1.5 million, about 500 times what they bought it for, and that ain't chicken feed. Richard Blystone, CNN, Burfield, England.
That's our report this half hour. Thanks for joining us. I'm Micah Johnson. Around the world in 30 minutes, this is Headline News. Headline News, I'm Micah Johnson. Lynn Vaughn is off this morning. The time to decide could be this week as the Senate resumed debate today on the INF Treaty. The White House wants a ratified agreement in time for next week's Moscow Superpower Summit. Democratic leader Sam Nunn says the chances for that are about 60-40. We have 2 reports on arms treaties in the summit. The first from Ralph Begleider.
Almost before the ink had dried on the medium-range missile agreement signed at the Washington summit, top Pentagon officials began campaigning to kill prospects for a second treaty covering long-range missiles. But Secretary of State Shultz followed the president's lead, ignoring the Joint Chiefs of Staff, pressing his negotiators to finish the second treaty that would be a far more significant jewel in the Reagan administration's crown.
Above all, I'm pressing ahead for an effectively verifiable START treaty, reducing U.S. and Soviet strategic arms by 50%. And during the just completed summit, further concrete progress was made in this regard.
But in the twisting corridors of the Pentagon and in the White House, the nation's armed services chiefs lobbied successfully against the treaty. The Joint Chiefs of Staff raised questions about the future of nuclear deterrence. What happens if nuclear arsenals are cut in half? Won't that lead quickly to another cut in nuclear weapons? Will Congress guarantee funding for weapons to take their place in the strategic balance? The Secretary of State hadn't got the message and was still pushing for a treaty.
I think it's definitely a possibility. And what we're trying to do is turn it into a probability. And then we'll struggle to turn it into a reality, and it'll be hard work all the way.
Within a few weeks, negotiators in Geneva had produced hundreds of pages of treaty text with a lot of agreement between the U.S. and Soviet sides. But to be ready by the summit, the treaty needed major political level decisions on SDI and a few other issues. By the end of March, the Pentagon's campaign against the START treaty had scuttled its prospects.
It is very clear now that we will not be able to reach final agreement on the strategic arms cuts that we have been working on in time for the summit.
By mutual agreement, Soviet and American arms negotiators will take a month's vacation after the summit. President Reagan still believes a strategic missile agreement is possible before he leaves office. But the debate inside the administration is still raging. Top military officers believe the election season and arms control complexity will kill the treaty after the summit. State Department negotiators think momentum and Soviet desire to have Ronald Reagan sign the deal are enough to make it happen. Ralph Begletter, CNN at the State Department.
3 out of every 5 respondents in the CNN USA Today poll say the major benefit of a summit is for the leaders to talk and improve relations. Nearly a quarter believe the summits help the superpowers avoid nuclear war. 9% say there's no benefit from such meetings, that they are all hype. Only 3% see summits as a place for American and Soviet leaders to sign treaties. But half of the 800 respondents polled by the Gordon Black Corporation say arms control is the most important issue on the Moscow summit agenda. Next, Middle East peace, followed by human rights, and then cultural and scientific exchanges. By a nearly 2-to-1 margin, Americans believe the Soviet Union is interested mainly in protecting its own national security, rather than bent on world domination. At the same time, nearly 70% see the Soviet Union as a threat to the United States. Which superpower leader has done more to promote world peace? Americans give the nod to President Reagan over Mikhail Gorbachev by a 3-to-1 margin. Finally, in the CNN USA Today poll done by telephone May 14th to 16th, we asked respondents which presidential candidate would be more effective in negotiating with Gorbachev. Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis, the likely Democratic nominee, gets a slight edge over George Bush. 54% say Dukakis would be at least somewhat effective in dealing with the Soviets, to 48% for Bush. 44% say Bush would not be effective, compared to only 30% for Dukakis, with 15% saying they don't know how Dukakis would do face-to-face with Gorbachev. John Holloman, CNN, Washington.
János Kadar, the leader of Hungary's Communist Party, has stepped down after 32 years as General Secretary. His resignation yesterday came at the end of a 3-day conference in which delegates openly called for new leadership and new policies. Replacing Kadar is Hungarian Premier Karli Grosz, who appears to be more open to political reform. Kadar was named to the largely ceremonial post of party president. The National Security Advisor says a plan is on the table which would allow Panama's military leader to step down. Colin Powell says President Reagan is undecided on a plan which would drop drug charges against Manuel Noriega. The announcement came after a weekend meeting of top White House officials. Powell says the deal would begin a long-term transition.
The nature of the deal is that if the deal goes forward, we would see a restoral of civic and political freedoms in Panama, and we would see an opportunity for a government of national reconciliation to be formed. We would continue to recognize President Duvalier as the legal head of Panama until such time as a government of national reconciliation found a new president to carry the government until elections could be held next year.
Secretary of State George Shultz says dropping drug charges is better than letting the general stay in power. But diplomats loyal to ousted President Eric Duvalier disapprove and hope to meet with State Department officials sometime today. Manila police are going from house to house searching for a Philippine Marine sergeant. The man is accused of killing 11 people in a drunken shooting spree Saturday night. He's a member of the Presidential Security Guard, an elite corps of military officers which protects President Corazon Aquino. Authorities in New York say revenge prompted a retired policeman to kill a federal judge outside his home. U.S. District Judge Richard Duranko was gardening Saturday when Charles Coster opened fire, then turned the gun on himself. Police say a suicide note indicated Coster wanted revenge because Duranko had dismissed a sexual harassment lawsuit filed by Coster's daughter. It's a bitter truth that heroes emerge from the worst of tragedies. Amy Moses is being called such a hero for her effort Friday to stop a deranged woman from shooting a classroom of children. Larry Roderick reports.
None of us really believed what was going on. And at about the second shot, I think the reality hit us. And the children at that point began to scream, and some ran out of the room through the back door.
Amy Moses recalling the horror of Friday. Suddenly, the diminutive 29-year-old teacher was surrounded by TV equipment and curious strangers as she recounted her struggle with this woman, Lori Dan, who walked into her classroom at the Hubbard Woods Elementary School and continued a chain of violence.
She said, "Put the children in a corner in the classroom." And I looked at her and I said, "No." She said, "I have a gun." At which point, she took out a gun, and it was tiny. It didn't look real, and she was holding it in her hand, and so I reached over and I took her arm. And she said to me, "It's real, and I have another one." At which point she broke free from my arm and just went up to each child that she shot, point blank, till she got out of the classroom.
The Winnetka police chief called her a hero.
Somebody asked me yesterday if there were any heroes there. We certainly had a number of them, but certainly Amy Moses was a hero.
I appreciate it. All I know is that when that woman came in the room, I knew that I was responsible for the children, that I was the teacher in the classroom, and that these children were under my protection. And I had to do everything in my power to make sure they weren't hurt.
But on Monday morning, just 3 days after the shooting, Amy Moses would be back in the Hubbard Woods Elementary School classroom. And I wondered whether or not she would be able to exorcise the ghosts of Friday, to feel comfortable in that same room again.
I will go back and I will do my job with the sensitivity and the care that I try to bring to it every day.
An 8-year-old boy was killed in the attack. 5 other children were wounded. We'll be back. Jimmy Swaggart says he's looking forward and forgetting the past. The fallen TV preacher returned to the pulpit of his ministry yesterday. But Jeff Levine reports Swaggart must deal with money shortfalls and a shattered image.
Under stormy skies, the faithful came to witness Jimmy Swaggart's return.
If you have your Bibles, would you turn with me, please, to the book of Philippians.
After a 3-month absence, Swaggart admitted he was a little nervous.
I have preached, stood before some of the largest crowds in the world, but I guess that I stand today with more fear and more trembling than I have ever stood before in all of my life.
Swaggart confessed to moral failure after February reports he had visited a New Orleans prostitute. The dynamic pastor subsequently was defrocked by the Assemblies of God Church for defying a 1-year preaching ban. Quoting from the Bible, though, Swaggart made it clear he wanted to put the scandal behind him.
But this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before.
From the seat of his multi-million-dollar religious empire, Swaggart said he would continue to do God's work, no matter how humble.
I would be honored to do anything for him and do it the rest of my life.
Swaggart's ministry is clearly in trouble. TV ratings and contributions are down. Some 150 employees have been laid off. Still, one of Swaggart's top advisors believes the financial problems can be overcome.
Of course it's hurt, but we believe the situation is stabilized and we're in a position to begin building again.
But Swaggart's supporters remain undeterred.
But he has to ask for forgiveness, and he has repented, and the Lord loves him, and he has forgiven him, and we have all forgiven him.
God's going to forgive Jimmy. He's the greatest, and he's going to be more popular than ever.
Swaggart's successful return is not necessarily a resurrection. His World Ministry Center is facing financial, legal, and moral dilemmas. But for now, at least, the defrocked preacher is back, spreading the gospel and praying for lost souls. Jeff Levine, CNN, Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Ohio authorities are on the lookout for a man who has escaped from a medium-security prison in Chillicothe. Officials say Michael Day took 2 guards hostage and escaped in a prison jeep last night. He then left the guards at a hotel and fled with his wife in a car. The American Civil Liberties Union wants to stop the execution of Argene Simmons, despite the convicted murderer's wish to die. The Arkansas man is scheduled for execution next month for killing 2 people last December in Russellville. The ACLU will hold talks today to discuss how to get the case heard by a higher court. About 1 joint's worth of marijuana has landed another boatie in hot water with the Coast Guard. The fishing boat was seized yesterday in San Francisco Bay after agents found the drugs. The seizure comes under the federal government's zero-tolerance policy, in which any vessel found with illegal drugs can be impounded. Residents of a Los Angeles housing project are proving there's a place for optimism in crime-ridden neighborhoods. They're sowing seeds of hard work, determination, and love. Ann McDermott has their story.
For the first time in 35 years, the Nickerson Gardens housing project has a garden.
There you go.
No big deal to some, perhaps, but at Nickerson, a sprawling project with a reputation as a breeding ground for some of Los Angeles' most violent gang members, it's proof that good things grow here, too.
Down here you got your mustard greens.
You can see the pride in the faces of the gardeners and the youngsters who come help them tend their plots. Youngsters who now boast favorite vegetables. Well, some are still learning. After all, many have never seen homegrown produce before, let alone exotic stuff like scarecrows. That prompts some to take a closer look. And many are taking a closer look at farming as a career. Juanita Randall was skeptical about the gardens at first. She'd only stare out her door as other women worked. Then she began helping, shooing away those who would disturb the plots.
Yes, because I feel if they can grow something and it benefit the neighborhood, why tear it down?
The gangs don't. They stay away.
A lot of the gangsters are scared of the old ladies, so they don't mess with the gardens at all.
The old ladies, though, aren't scared of gang members. But they have no illusions that something as simple as a garden is going to foster the kind of community pride that can change gang members into solid citizens. Gang members will only change, says one woman, when they have to.
I think as time goes on, I think the children in general, the young men and adults and the young ones come along, are going to get tired of getting killed. Just simple as that.
And so they tend their garden, even as they tend the reputation of Nickerson Gardens. It's not a bad place to live, they say, as they point with pride to their garden. Ann McDermott, CNN, Los Angeles.
Headline Sports is next. It's 19 minutes after the hour. Time now for Headline Sports.
I'm Bob Pasella, Headline Sports. The Boston Celtics' Larry Bird and Atlanta Hawks' Dominique Wilkins engaging in an old-fashioned shootout Sunday afternoon at the Boston Garden in Game 7 of their Eastern Conference semifinal. But when the last shot was fired, only the Birdman left standing. Bird scoring 34 points, including 20 in the final quarter, outshining a 47-point effort by Dominique Wilkins. Boston eliminating Atlanta 118-116. The Celtics advanced to the Eastern Finals to face Detroit. Glenn Sather's Edmonton Oilers one victory shy of their 4th Stanley Cup trophy in the last 5 years. Sunday night at the Boston Garden, Asa Tikkanen scoring 3 times. The Oilers doubling the Bruins 6-3, taking a 3-0 lead in the best of 7. Golf, Sherry Turner birdies the final 2 holes, winning her first tour event, the LPGA Championship in Ohio. Lanny Watkins firing a final round 5 under par 65, capturing the Colonial National in Fort Worth. The Atlanta Braves, owners of the worst record in the National League, firing manager Chuck Tanner and 4 of his coaches. Tanner is replaced by former Red skipper Russ Nixon, but Chuck's last game at the helm, a winning one. Bruce Benedict's opposite field double capping a 5-run first, Atlanta beating the Pirates 6-4. Cubs rookie Mark Grace driving in 4 runs, 2 coming on this blast, Chicago downing the Reds 5-1. The Mets have won 7 straight. Darryl Strawberry collecting 3 hits, driving in 3 runs. New York sweeping the Dodgers with a 5-2 victory. The Giants' Will Clark pounding his 10th home run. San Fran tripping up Montreal 7-2. The Astros by a run, and San Diego stops the Phillies. In the American, Jack Clark slamming a two-run homer, backing the two-hit 13-strikeout performance of John Candelaria. The Yankees blanking the A's 2-0. The Tigers' Walt Terrell 5-hitting the White Sox in a 3-1 victory. Detroit has won 5 in a row. Boston bombing the Angels. The O's have won 2 straight. Cleveland wins in 10. Milwaukee over Toronto. And Minnesota sweeping a doubleheader from Texas. Gary Gaetti with a grand slam in the nightcap. Bob Pasella, Headline Sports.
I'm Brian Christie, and Jennifer Edwards is who's making movies in the family tradition. The daughter of Blake Edwards and a fourth-generation filmmaker says she's been on the set since age 10. She plays a villainess in her father's latest film, Sunset. She says as a director, Dad is just as tough as anybody.
The only difference, I think, is that my father calls me honey and darling a little more than maybe other directors would.
Brian Christie, Headline News.
Taking a look at today's forecast, high pressure will keep the sky clear over the nation's western half, except for Idaho. The sky there will be cloudy. Clouds and rains are predicted for most of the eastern half of the country. High temperatures will be in the 70s and 80s. In most states, it will be slightly cooler with highs in the 60s for Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and eastern Colorado. Highs will reach above 90 in parts of the Southwest and Florida. More news after this. Clothes buying for next winter seems a long way off, but experts say you should make your wardrobe purchases now because high fashion is going to cost more dollars and cents. Richard Roth reports.
Attention clothes shoppers, do not delay inside the dressing room.
Prices are going in the clothing industry up.
Women's apparel has already seen the biggest increase, more than 3 times that of menswear.
Outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. They've escalated so much that I buy all used clothing, I buy all antique clothing, I go to thrift shops.
Prices have gone up on average 15 to 20% in the last year. Clothiers are preparing for a possible backlash.
It appears that we have a softening economy, a softening in potential demand, and rising prices, which is the most frightening area to be in terms of running a business based on natural commodities.
New buyers of fiber and yarn on the world market, such as the Soviet Union and China, mean higher prices domestically.
This is a cashmere coat for this fall, which will retail for approximately $600. For fall of 1989, that coat will be at least $700 to $750.
A lot of consumers, a lot of shoppers will be buying less but better and more lastingly fashionable clothes.
Some stores are expected to do away with lower-priced items as they try to attract the increasing pool of women in the workforce who are buying suits. Clothes buyer John O'Neill says despite the high prices, the time to buy is now.
If a man is smart, he'll go out and buy his wardrobe for next year now.
Even if the dollar reversed course and other global pressures eased, industry figures say don't expect prices to head back to their old levels. Richard Roth, CNN, New York.
A new high-tech show called Captain Power is rocketing to popularity on the television airwaves. But a controversial aspect of the show brings criticism from a watchdog group on children's TV. Dennis Michael explains.
Power on. Captain Power is as advanced as anything you'll see on television with its groundbreaking use of computer animation and live action. But in one way, the show may have been damaged by its own technology. When the Mattel Toy Company joined forces with Landmark Entertainment to fund Captain Power, it added interactive toys to the mix.
We saw the opportunity that the Captain Power concept really would fit nicely with our interactive technologies.
It worked as toy sales and syndicated ratings soared. But there was a drawback for Mattel and Landmark Entertainment. Children's television activists were immediately critical of the idea.
You have to go out and buy something to use with the program. That is the height of arrogance.
Mattel disagrees and favors letting the market decide.
Only a small fraction of the audience will ever own the toy line. So if the show was not working for its entertainment value, the stations would not be seeing the kind of rating success that they are seeing.
The man in the middle of the controversy is Gary Goddard, one of the creators and designers of Captain Power, who would like to see his show judged exclusively on its merits and not only on its ancillary merchandising.
Siskel and Ebert reviewed the show, and they loved the show. And they were reviewing this as a show. It's a TV show. And they said, hey, forget the toys. This is a good show. The scripts are good. The dialogue is good. The production values are good.
Despite the hue and cry over interactive toys and the whole dividing line between content and commercials, Captain Power is becoming a powerhouse in syndication. But Landmark isn't oblivious to the criticism leveled at Captain Power. They've recently added a child psychologist to the staff and are experimenting with educational uses of video interactive technology. Dennis Michael, CNN, Hollywood.
That's our report this half hour. Thanks for joining us. I'm Micah Johnson. Around the world in 30 minutes, this is Headline News. Headline News, I'm Micah Johnson. Lynn Vaughn has the morning off. A substitute teacher is being called a hero in Winnetka, Illinois, where 5 children were shot at a school on Friday. Amy Moses is credited with keeping the shooting rampage from being even worse. Lori Dan entered the classroom and shot 6 students, killing 1. Moses said she defied orders from Dan to herd the children into a corner and tried to stop the shooting.
She took out a gun, and it was tiny. It didn't look real, and she was holding it in her hand, and so I reached over and I took her arm. And she said to me, "It's real, and I have another one." At which point she broke free from my arm and just went up to each child that she shot, point blank, till she got out of the classroom.
Dan killed herself after opening fire on the classroom. Winnetka residents held special services for victims of the shooting yesterday. A memorial service is planned today for 8-year-old Nicholas Corwin, the child killed on Friday. Authorities say revenge was the motive for Saturday's killing of a federal judge in New York. As Jeff Weiser reports, the attacker was angry over a recent court decision.
There are not many violent crimes that take place in the Westchester County village of Pelham, an affluent community just north of New York City. But on Saturday, a pleasant springtime afternoon was interrupted with gunshots. Shots allegedly fired by a middle-aged white male at 56-year-old federal judge Richard Duranko.
Duranko was the victim of a homicide, and the killer, after taking the judge's life, took his own life with a shot to the head, right in the judge's home.
Police say the assailant first shot Duranko with a handgun in the yard of his well-kept home as he did gardening, then chased him into the house, firing more shots, which killed the judge. Neighbors say Duranko's wife and one of his 5 children screamed for help during the attack. It was only last year that President Reagan appointed the judge to serve in the federal court's Southern District of New York. Before that, Duranko, the son of Italian immigrants, had a long and well-respected judicial career as a state Supreme Court justice.
All of us in the United States Attorney's Office are very deeply hurt by all this, and feel very bad for the judge's family and for all of his friends and associates. He was a fine man. He was not only a very good judge, but he was a very decent human being.
Late Sunday, the FBI identified a former New York City police officer as the killer. 67-year-old Charles Coster of Bath, Pennsylvania, whose daughter had lost a lawsuit before the judge.
Lawsuit which involved charges of sexual harassment and salary discrimination finally went to trial. On May 19, 1988, Judge Duranko issued a decision against Carol Lee Coster in this matter. A suicide note was located, the context of which indicates displeasure with the judge's decision.
Friends and colleagues say they'll remember Judge Duranko as a great man who was well-liked. And the judge's family issued a statement expressing their deep shock, saying this has devastated his family and the entire community. Jeff Weiser, CNN, Pelham, New York.
Authorities in the Philippines are searching for a member of President Corazon Aquino's elite security force. The presidential guard is accused of a Saturday night shooting spree and killing 11 people in his path. Investigators say the attacker started his rampage at a bar where he was drinking with friends. President Aquino made no mention of the incident yesterday during her weekly radio call-in show. A deal for the ouster of Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega is on the table, awaiting President Reagan's approval. That word comes from National Security Advisor Colin Powell. He says all the elements of the deal have not come together, and the president has yet to make a final decision. Powell says under the proposal, the U.S. would continue recognizing ousted President Eric Del Valle as Panama's legitimate leader. The Secretary of State denies reports that the deal would let current president and Noriega supporter Manuel Solis Palma stay in power after Noriega leaves. Panama's ambassador to the U.S., Juan Sosa, says any deal that would leave Noriega cronies in command is unacceptable. With the Superpower Summit a week away, the Senate resumes debate today on the INF Treaty. The administration wants President Reagan to go to Moscow with a ratified agreement in hand, completing the process officially started in Washington 5 months ago. One Soviet official says the U.S. needs to follow through.
When we were in Washington in December, people told us that don't worry, there will be the majority in the Senate and it will be, the treaty will be ratified by April. Now we have May already. It's not a big tragedy, but simply, we expect that if you promise, then you must deliver. But we also understand your political system. So it's not a big tragedy, but of course it's a good sign of your willingness to improve relations between our countries if you ratify a treaty by the time of the Moscow summit.
The fate of the INF Treaty could in part set the mood for the summit. Patricia Ox has more.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev has set an almost poetic tone for the first U.S.-Soviet summit to be held in Moscow in 14 years. In an interview with the Washington Post and Newsweek magazine, he said the winds of the Cold War are being replaced by the winds of hope, and he proposed American and Soviet scientists jointly participate in an unmanned flight to planet Mars. The idea got a subdued reaction from U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz.
Obviously, this has to be studied carefully and gone forward right, including we always have to be careful with problems of technology transfer.
But cultural and educational exchanges are in full swing. News of more will likely come from this summit. The energy with which Gorbachev has pursued glasnost has been matched by his attention to perestroika, or political and economic restructuring. He called the changing Soviet system a turbulent sea in which it is not easy to sail the ship, but we have a compass and we have a crew to guide the ship, and the ship itself is strong. Gorbachev expressed hope, as have U.S. leaders, of getting a strategic arms treaty. The Soviet leader said, "If a treaty is ready before President Reagan leaves office, I see no reason why President Reagan and I should not sign it. I would certainly welcome that." The Senate has yet to ratify the treaty banning intermediate-range nuclear weapons. Hopes are high among U.S. officials President Reagan can attend the summit bearing the INF gift.
I think it would be very important for the president to have that treaty with him to exchange the instruments of ratification. There's no reason he shouldn't.
Senator Sam Nunn of the Senate Armed Services Committee sees less urgency.
And I think that we ought to put it in perspective. Even if we don't ratify by Friday or Saturday, it's not the end of the world, and I think the Soviets know that the treaty will be ratified.
Without tangible arms control successes, both leaders may need the summit most for the photo opportunities it is sure to afford. More memorable pictures like those of Gorbachev greeting Washington passers-by last December. With President Reagan still unable to pry General Noriega from Panama and still ducking astrology jokes, and Gorbachev facing stiff opposition to perestroika, both men clearly hope positive press at the summit will bolster their domestic images. Patricia Ox, CNN, the White House.
Coming up on Headline News, Jesse Jackson tries to win the hearts and votes of Californians. And a small town in Texas remembers the night it lost almost everything.